Hi everyone, welcome to another Plenty workshop about healthy cooking and their nutritional value. So I'm Sarah Andrus, I'm a registered dietitian, and I spend most of the week working at Newton Wellesley Hospital as one of their outpatient dietitians, but I also enjoy cooking classes and teaching people about the nutrition behind their meals. I often like to preface by saying that I am not a chef, so I don't have any formal culinary training. So all of the meals and recipes that I share with you, if I can do it, most people can do it. I like to keep it simple. Why have an intimidating recipe, especially for a weeknight family meal, and make it complicated if it doesn't have to be. So today, we are going to be doing a one-pot meal, which is my favorite because it's easy. There's only one cooking implement, one thing to wash, and it's one of those set it and forget it for a while meals, which I think is great, especially if you're busy at home and don't have time to kind of keep an eye on a meal for 30-40 minutes. So this is going to be a vegetarian chili. Now, chili is very common in the colder months. It's currently November here, so it's getting cold. But you can really have chili any time of year, but I always like to make, whenever I can, a dish that typically has meat in it and see if I can make it a more plant-based option. The reason for that is twofold. One, meat can be really expensive. So depending on the type of meat that you're buying, plant-based options are typically less expensive. So in this case, we're going to be using beans, and beans are 70 to dollar, 70 cents to $1 per can, and very easy to find. Most convenience stores have cans of beans too, so kind of your neighborhood corner store. And then really the rest of this dish is very flexible on what you use in terms of vegetables. So you'll notice on the recipe handout that I have paired with this cooking demonstration, I just say 3 cups of vegetables. And so that could really be anything. Today, you'll see that I'm using carrots because I had them on hand, sweet potato left over from the farmer's market, and it's going to be going bad soon, so I want to make sure to use it up. And then I had some frozen broccoli in my freezer, and so that will cook nicely as well. You can also use things like bell pepper, you can use zucchini, you could use leafy greens. I would do them at the very end when you're about to serve the dish so that they wilt in with the dish. I'll also be using some corn too to put in this dish. And then another veggie that is kind of essential in this dish is tomatoes. So I'll be using canned diced tomatoes and a little bit of tomato paste, and then also onions for some more flavor. So really, all of these things can be found in your pantry. So for most of us, right? So if you don't have time to run out to the store, but you want to have a home cooked meal and not have to order takeout, then chili is something that's very forgiving to whip up. And by that I mean, as long as you have a couple cans of beans, doesn't really matter what kind of beans. I'll be using kidney beans and black beans for this recipe, but you could use pinto, you could use chickpeas, also called garbanzo beans. It's really anything. And then whether veggies you have on store, and most of us have some sort of tomatoes. You might not have tomato paste. The rationale behind the tomato paste is to thicken up the chili a little bit. So again, not necessary, but it is a nice element to have. So it's always good to have a little bit of tomato paste in your pantry. And then if you don't use all of it, which we won't, I'll just freeze the rest. And you can freeze it in preset sizes. So For a chili, for example, I only use a tablespoon or two, and so you can have that kind of pre-set in a little baggie in your freezer and just dump that right in when you want to make your next chili. All right, so for today, I've prepped a few things already so that you don't have to watch me do it on the screen. So one is onion. I've already diced one onion. It can be white or it can be yellow onion. I have in one of the other videos, I kind of show how to cut an onion if this is your first time. But because I get kind of teary-eyed and it takes a while, I figured why show that on the screen just to save time. So I've already diced up some onion. I've also set aside some of my frozen broccoli. Again, just took a couple handfuls out. So this is about 1.5 cups of broccoli. And then I've already drained and rinsed my beans. So let me just bring that around so you can see it. So I have the kidney beans and the black beans that I've already, they were from a can. I chose the low sodium version, but if you have the high sodium version or the regular, then you can just rinse it and most of the salt comes off. But I rinse these anyway because it's good to get a little bit of the consistency that was in there in the liquid rinsed off of the beans. Some recipes will actually call for saving that liquid, especially with chickpeas. It's called aquafaba, and it can be really nice thickener, but for this, you don't need to do that. So I have 1 can of each, and then I've already opened up my tomatoes and tomato paste. What I haven't done is I'm also gonna do some corn kernels. You don't have to do corn kernels, but I kind of like it for color and a little bit of crunch. So I'm also going to open up that can too. And then all that's left really is, so far, minimal effort. And so I'm going to be cutting up the 2 vegetables here. And then the other piece of equipment that I have out behind me is a large pot. So you just need a pot that has a lid because we're going to want this to simmer and we don't want it to evaporate all of the good liquid. So I'm just draining these corn kernels here. Okay. You don't need to rinse the corn. So this is just very quick to do. All right, perfect. You could use frozen corn too, but I just think canned is so much easier, especially in 2020 when we're dealing with the pandemic and not trying to go to the grocery store as much. Having a bunch of canned stuff on hand is always good. Just remember to try to get the lower sodium version, especially if you or a family member has high blood pressure or hypertension. And then if you're doing the canned fruits, make sure that it doesn't have a lot of that syrup. So look for it to be canned in 100% fruit juice or no added sugar, because a lot of times they can just be sitting in a lot of sugary syrup. Okay, so to begin, I'm going to first start by cutting up these carrots. I want them to be in bite-sized pieces. So with anything that's going into a chili, you want them to be bite-sized. And that's because you don't want to have a knife when you're eating your chili. Most of this will soften up in the pot, but it won't really shrink in size. So just want to make sure that we're getting that there. What I'm doing is I'm just cutting off the ends as I go and throwing them in the trash, because you don't want the stocky ends. They're a little bit too tough and don't taste that great. But other than that, I'm keeping the carrots. These were pre-packaged, so I didn't rinse these, but you can also buy carrots that are, from a farmer's market, and they might have some dirt on them, so just make sure to rinse off the dirt, scrub them a little bit, and that's fine. You don't need to peel your carrots unless they're looking really rough on the outside, and then for aesthetics, you can if you want, but there's no need to to peel your carrots. I think that's just one extra step. That's not necessary. Okay. Carrots are a great source, and sweet potatoes actually, of vitamin A. So any vegetable, and fruit for that matter, but any vegetable that is pretty bright orange, you can pretty much guarantee that it's going to be high in vitamin A. Vitamin A is an essential vitamin for us. Most of us get enough, but if you're deficient in it, deficiencies can affect your skin health. Your skin can become more dry, more susceptible to injuries. So it helps keep the barrier of your skin strong. It also is good for eye health. And it's also good for your immune system. We're talking a lot about our immune system these days with the coronavirus pandemic. And vitamin A is one of those kind of immune boosting vitamins. You can't necessarily boost your immune system, but you can help it. And so carrots is one good way of doing that. Another good one is sweet potato. So I'm going to leave the skin on this sweet potato because that's where some of the fiber is. And also it would take more work peeling it. So it's kind of a win-win. So what I'm going to do here, like I've shown in other videos with sweet potato, is I'm going to cut it in half lengthwise with the claw method, right? So I don't want to have my fingers to be at risk of being hit. So instead I make a claw. So now I'm going to put it on its flat side so it's more stable. And I'm going to cut it in half again, just so that it is closer to bite-sized pieces. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to chop. Again, bite size is going to be less than an inch wide. And so that's kind of what I'm looking for. Depending on the size, if you're going to use sweet potato, depending on its size, you might want to go through and cut it again, especially in the thickest part of the sweet potato. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm just going to cut it again. And this is a lot of orange because my cutting board is also orange. So here we have bite-sized pieces of sweet potato, again with its skin on, bite-sized pieces of carrot. And the frozen broccoli is usually pretty good at already being bite-sized, but it's always a good thing with any frozen vegetables like this, it's a little bit too big, so I'm just going to take that and cut it and look through to see if there are any really big chunks. Again, when you're eating your chili, you don't want to have to struggle with eating too big of a piece. That's not fun. All right, so I'll cut that. Perfect. All right. So now I have all my vegetables are cut, or they're ready to go in their can. So now if you're following along with the directions, so I'll put some oil in the bottom of my pan. And I want to first saute a little bit of the onion. That way it gets a lot of its flavor compounds released. It smells up your kitchen in a beautiful way, and it browns a little bit. So it first becomes translucent, and then it gets a little bit brown, and that's when we want to add in the rest of the veggies. And so we're trying to kind of pre-cook the veggies a little bit before we add any of the liquid. So I'm going to do that first. So I have my big pot. In terms of oil, you can add whatever you want. I'm doing olive oil because it's already ready to go in this canister. You can also do canola oil. You could do avocado oil. You could do coconut oil. The thing with coconut oil, though, is that it is pretty high in saturated fat. And what we're learning is that even though it's a plant-based version of saturated fat, so saturated fat usually just comes from an animal like butter, cheese, whole milk, beef, those kind of things. The plant-based version of saturated fat, which is really just coconut oil, can also adversely affect heart health. And so it has a great flavor and everything, but I think with the coconut oil popularity, I would say try to minimize your use of coconut oil. So instead, use really any other oil. Canola oil or peanut oil are going to be your cheapest. Peanut oil, I usually reserve for things where you're going to get it really high heat. So you're going to be sauteing in a wok and creating a lot of steam because the smoke point, or the point at which the oil starts to smoke, is pretty high for peanut oil, whereas for olive oil and canola oil, it's fairly low. For this dish, we're not going to be sauteing at a very, very high heat, so you can use any oil that you want. So I just put in about a tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of oil in the bottom of my pot. And now I'm going to set it to medium heat. And as that's starting to heat up, I'm now going to put in my onion. It is good to have all the things pre-cut before you start cooking with this recipe because things can move fast. But once everything is in the pot, you're good. There's nothing else that you need to do except for occasionally look at it if you want to make sure that it's not boiling over or anything, and then just let it sit for 20 minutes. So that is going to be heating up in there. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a spatula, a big spoon, whatever you've got, and I'm just going to toss it around so that the oil coats the onion. Because if there are pieces of onion that do not have the oil, then it's not going to nicely brown. It's going to potentially just burn, and we don't want that. All right, so I'll let that go for probably another minute until it starts to become translucent and maybe a few pieces become brown. So in terms of other things that you want to have out, I also like to add some spices. So you can use, I'm going to put a little bit of cayenne in mine because I like a little bit of heat, but you don't have to use that. I'm also going to use a little bit of cumin. And then I'm going to also use some curry powder. If I can find my curry powder. In terms of other things that you can use, so you can use a lot of different spices. So again, if you want it spicy, you can add red chili, pepper flakes, cayenne pepper. You can use a little bit more black pepper or something. If you or your family members do not like spicy, kind of capsaicin, that really spicy heat, then I would stay away from those and just put in the chili powder and the cumin. Some people also like to add in a little bit of garlic. I don't have a minced garlic clove in this recipe because I don't think it's necessary, but you could at the same time as the onion put in a garlic clove, or if you don't have a garlic clove, put in a little bit of dried garlic powder. For this, I think that this is fine, but again, everyone has kind of their own preferences there. All right, let's see. So this is starting to make some noise. There we go. All right, let me show you what's happening in here. So you can start to see, I think, if you can, some of it is getting a little bit brown, but it's also becoming more translucent or see-through. And what's good is that browning at the bottom of your pan is actually called fond, and you want to get that with the liquid that we put in. You want to get that brown part at the bottom of the pan to come back into the dish because it holds a lot of flavor. So now next on the list is to put in all the vegetables and saute for a couple of minutes. So now that I've chopped everything, in goes the carrot. I have some pieces that are going rogue. Grab those, toss them in. All right, so we have our sweet potato and our carrot. And now we're also going to put in our broccoli. What I'm not going to do right now is the corn, because I'm going to put that in a little bit later because it doesn't need to be heated through or sauteed really. So this is going to saute for a couple minutes. Then I'm going to add in a little bit of the liquid. And again, that's going to get that fond at the bottom, that browning part at the bottom of your pan to come back in, as well as all the spices. So right now it's really just the onions, the vegetables, and some oil. It's still on medium heat because you don't want to burn the onion that's been in there. You can also clean a little bit as you go, as you're waiting for this dish to have all the ingredients in it. Sometimes that makes it easier so you're not overwhelmed at the end with everything. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to have you watch me wash dishes, but this would be the time that I would typically start to just scrub the cutting board and the knife and everything, just so that at the end of this, I'm not overwhelmed by looking at all the dishes that I have. Though really for this, there aren't that many dishes. It's going to be that one pot, spatula, maybe a couple of bowls, and the cutting board. So not bad at all. So what we're looking at for those vegetables is you want them to get a little bit soft. And so especially for the frozen veggies, some of the ice crystals are going to melt, and so they're going to add a little bit of water in, and then it's finally going to soften up the veggies. So sometimes frozen veggies take a little bit longer to soften. That's why when you're getting ready, I usually like to put out the frozen veggies first in a bowl as you're getting everything else ready to go. And that way you can put it all in at the same time and have it be already thawed a little bit. All right, so next, in terms of the diced tomatoes, so this is a 16-ounce can of diced tomatoes. You can put more in if you want. Some people really like a lot of tomatoes, chunky tomatoes in their dish. So you could do up to 2 of these cans if you wanted to. I would stick with the diced tomatoes. If you do whole, there's a lot of different ways to do tomatoes, buy them rather in a can. So if you do whole peeled tomatoes, that's better for a sauce. So it's going to break down a little bit too much into the pot and not be as great in terms of texture, but the flavor will still be fine. The texture will just be a little off because the whole tomatoes will have broken down and made more of like a spaghetti sauce almost. And then there's also micro diced tomatoes. I think those are a little bit too small. And then you can have more of the you could just have a regular tomato that you cut up. So I also have this tomato that I could cut up and put in the dish. That's totally fine. I just find that the diced tomato cans, most people have them in their cupboard, and it's very easy just to pour right in. It also lends a little bit of liquid. So if you're going to do the regular whole tomato and dice that up, then you're going to want to add in a little bit more water than we do in this recipe, just to make up for the water that you're missing from that can. All right, so let's see how these are doing. Great, so these are starting to soften a little bit. The broccoli will also turn a very bright, rich green, and that's when you know that it's starting to heat through. which is a good thing when you're using frozen broccoli to kind of know. All right. So I think it's ready to add in some of the liquid. So the diced tomatoes are going to go in, as well as the cup of water that I'll get, and then the spices. Then I'm going to bring that all up to a boil and then simmer, and then that's when I'm going to add in the corn and the tomato paste, because they just need to sit in a very low simmer. They don't need to boil. So first I'll put in the diced tomatoes. Okay. And then I'll add in a cup of water. As you're cooking this, if you want to kind of check on the water level just to see, sometimes people like their chilies super thick. Some people like them to have a little bit more liquid to it. So you can monitor towards the end. So we'll set the timer for about 20 minutes and we'll see. So next I'm going to do some cumin. I'm going to eyeball because I kind of know roughly how much is going in. But it's sometimes helpful to measure ahead of time. Just combine it all in one dish. So again, I'm doing cumin, chili powder, and a little bit of cayenne pepper. And so now I'm going to bring all that up to a boil and then reduce it to a simmer. So this is where it's helpful to have the lid. I'm going to stir this around. Put the lid on this. So I'm going to crank up the heat. And so you'll start to hear it when it starts to boil. It'll take, 2 minutes to boil. And the reason for that is we want everything to get very hot in there. And so to start to have all the tomatoes break down a little bit, get all the spices, release some of their flavor compounds. But then we want to simmer it because then we just want everything to slowly cook over the remaining 15, 20 minutes that we cook it. So that includes the beans and the corn. And then a tomato paste, right, is just for a thickener. So let's see. All right, this is actually already boiling, which is perfect. So now you're going to take the heat way down. And a simmer really just means that you have a couple of bubbles that appear, but it's far from a rolling boil. Okay, I'm going to turn this up one. All right, so now it's starting to simmer. So now we put in the rest of the ingredients. So we'll put in the beans. Again, I'm using the black beans and the kidney beans. And then we'll put in the corn. And then I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. Perfect. And again, what I'll do with this tomato paste is I'm going to put it in a baggie because I've used about half of this. And so that'll be another 2 tablespoons that are left for another chili recipe. So if I want to make it next week, just pull it out from the freezer and voila, I have it ready to go. I don't even need to measure it because I know it's about 2 tablespoons. All right, so I'm now going to stir all that around and let simmer, and I'm going to set the timer for 20 minutes. Again, I would maybe pop back and check on it halfway through, give it a stir, see how much liquid is there, if you want to add any more. If you find that it has too much liquid for your liking, you can take off the lid and let some of that water and liquid evaporate out. That's another way to do that. But usually I find that this recipe starts with a little bit less water and blends to a thicker chili, and if you want, you can add a little bit of water towards the end. So let me stir everything, and I will carry this over to the camera so that you can kind of see what's happening in here. It's super colorful, which is great, because what that means is that you're getting a lot of different vitamins, minerals, and what are called phytonutrients, which are compounds that we're learning that are in different colors in fruits and veggies that are very good for our health. So it's nice to eat orange foods, and by that I mean fruits and veggies, not necessarily Cheetos, green foods, purple, etc. So this is very colorful. So again, you can see that kind of the liquid doesn't cover the top of this, and that's fine. So now that's all stirred. So now I'm just going to make sure that it simmers, and I'm going to set my timer for 20 minutes. And that's it. So now dinner is going to be ready in 20 minutes. Again, check it partway through just to see. And remember that most of this I used frozen and canned vegetables, so those are great. If you have any fresh veggies that are going to maybe be going bad soon, you can feel that they're getting a little bit soft. Perfect thing for chili because it's going to get soft anyway. So root vegetables like sweet potato is a great example, or regular potatoes are great examples because they, once they start to go bad and they start to get too soft, you usually don't want to use them for anything else. So use those for chili. But again, you can use any veggies that you have on hand. This is kind of, you know, with the kitchen sink cookies, this is kind of like a kitchen sink dinner meal where you just throw everything in the pot, add some nice spices, and you're ready to go. So I hope that you enjoyed this and that maybe you learned something, especially if you haven't made your own vegetarian chili. Maybe you're used to the beef or the turkey chili, and I hope you like it.